Check, check. All right, Mr. Mayor, apologies for the delay. We're ready to proceed.
Apologies under consideration.
Thank you.
We'll now call to order the Riverside City Council meeting at 3 minutes after 6. And we'll all ask you if you're able to rise and pledge allegiance with us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown, Mr. Denning.
Here.
Ms. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Joseph, Ms. Lomatch,
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield,
Present.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Motion to excuse absent members.
Second.
We have a motion from the Deputy Mayor and a second from Mr. Denning to excuse our 2 absent members. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And we'll now move on to any additions or corrections to the agenda. Mr. Manager, are there any of those as presented?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Lomatch and a second from the Deputy Mayor to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved. We'll now move into our monthly updates, and I'll hand it over to the City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To begin with, we'll turn it over to Ms. Baker in the Finance Department for a brief update.
Okay. At next week's meeting, I'll be presenting the third quarter financials, so I'm not going to talk about numbers tonight. But the finance team's diligently been working on the budget along with a lot of other people within the city. I just want to say that we have a great team and everyone's working together. I've been really impressed with the work that's been put in so far, especially from the city manager. Part of that process involves reconciling current year data so that we can make good assumptions for next year. So a lot of work's been going into reconciling year-to-date totals, including our certificate of estimated resources. Once I have that, we'll be able to look at our budget to actual so that we can make really good 2025 decisions. That's almost done too. I'll have that by next week to include with the financials. Our certified audit became available this week from 2023. All of you should have received an email so that you can view it. We're also making that available on the website so that the public can have it as well. We did hire a new finance assistant. She's been with us about a month. She's been doing very well, and we hope that we'll continue to make growth in this team. Part of what we've done recently is set goals with the city manager, and our goals through second quarter of '25 include things such as compiling accurate asset lists and getting them into our financial system, getting controls over our personnel expenses, which includes implementing a new personnel time and attendance system citywide. We are working on policy updates, so at next week's council meeting, you'll see an investment policy that I'd like to pass. But we're also working on an asset policy and a credit card policy that should be finalized and adopted by the end of the year. So you'll see those later this year. Another goal of ours is to do records cleanup. There's a lot of stuff to go through, and some things should have already been disposed of, but there's a lot to just filter through. And then the last thing is obviously growth. I think everyone should work on growth as far as staying up to date with rules, regulations, and best practices, so we're always doing continuous process improvements. That's all I have.
Questions for Ms. Baker? All right. Well, thank you for that update. We look forward to some more of that substantive documentation we're going to see next week. And thank you for your time this evening. Back to the city manager.
I'm actually going to reserve some administration-related updates for the end of the meeting since we have some presenters here this evening. So in the interest of expediency, I'll hold back on a couple of those, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Holt instead in community development.
Thank you and good evening. I'll also keep my update pretty brief. So some things I know that you're all very excited about is I'll give an update on our zoning code update. The consultant has met with our steering committee and given them an update on where we are, kind of the direction that they're looking at after studying our zoning code and hearing some of the feedback. We have got a little under 100 responses on the survey. Would love to get a few more, so send that out to your neighbors and your friends. They're going to present at this month's Planning Commission, giving, again, that high-level update of where they're at, the direction they want to go, and where we are. Looking at the different codes, a hybrid code is kind of the direction they're leaning on, but they still want to get that feedback from Planning Commission and the rest of our community. So definitely tune in to our Planning Commission or attend on October 21st at 6:30. And then I'm working with our code enforcement officers and the rest of our team on kind of changing how our workflow is. We're finding and implementing new tools within our system, and it's been great having Gina Trexler on our team, our second code enforcement officer, to get some of our case load kind of down, and finding out how we can better serve our community and quickly respond to some of the complaints that we get. So that's been great, and we've seen that caseload really, and that backlog just drop significantly now that we have her on board. And finally, Gina, myself, and Lori this week attended what they're calling a zoning alliance meeting, something that Karen Kaler with Jefferson Township set up. And it's more than just zoning, it's economic development, and it's code enforcement officers. It's a regional effort for all of us to meet and kind of work out problems that we're all facing together and kind of brainstorm how we can solve them. So it's like, you're having an issue with nuisance, you're having an issue of how to attract businesses to this region. How can we work together to solve these problems collectively? And that's what this zoning alliance will be, and they'll have subcommittees with those different areas that I mentioned, like code enforcement and things of that nature, and they'll meet quarterly. But that first meeting was this week. So that's all I have.
All right, any questions for Ms. Holt? It's very exciting to hear about the collaboration amongst zoning officials and city planners and economic development folks, and we should meet more than just once a year at the workshop at Sinclair.
Yeah, a lot of the people who attended weren't even aware of the workshops. It was a great,
What?
Yes, to promote
The
that.
best day of the year. It
Going
is.
for years. I don't
Yeah.
know
The
where
first,
they've been.
the first Friday in December.
So we were able to, they had questions about zoning and cemetery. I was like, well, there's going to be a session on that. The treasurer was there, the recorder, so they were able to ask questions. It was a really good time to really talk through some issues that a lot of our communities are facing when we're talking about foreclosures, or, hey, I have this problem, how are you doing business registrations, or how are you handling tall grass and things like that. So it was a great meeting.
Wonderful to hear. Well, thank you, Ms. Holt, and we will pass it back to the city manager then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a couple presentations this evening, and first up, I'd like to invite Mr. Lance Oakes to give us an update on Glendine Point. So, Mr. Oakes?
Thank you very much, Josh. Lance Oakes, 8534 Yankee Street, Dayton, Ohio. And as Josh mentioned, appreciate you guys giving me a couple minutes this evening to just speak about Glendine Point. I've been working very closely with staff over the last couple months, as well as Jim, the attorney, and they've been great to work with. They've beat me up a little bit, so you should congratulate them, but they've been
They're
good to work
tough.
with.
They're tough.
So, but I do appreciate it. And so just a quick overview, just wanted to give you guys kind of a rundown of the site, where it's at. The site plan, there's a parcel tonight we'll discuss that I'm looking to purchase off the city. Kind of some of the amenities and the highlights of the community. There's a CRA ask that we'll talk about for a little bit, and then just the schedule, if everything works out. So with that said, the site's actually located just around the corner here from where we're at on Glendine Avenue. It's 10 acres, and then the city parcel, I believe, is about 3.7 acres. And we'll see that a little bit here in the next slides. This is just a quick overall conceptual plan of what it'll look like. It's consisting of 97 townhomes, and I've got some slides of what the townhomes would look like. On this picture, you can see some additional parking spaces that I'll highlight. There's about 43 of them for guests but every unit, townhome unit will have a garage that will take at least one vehicle, and the driveway should accommodate another. So there shouldn't be a lot of parking on the street or any, and we have additional parking spaces for guests and others as well. And then here's an overhead. You can kind of see the 10 acres, and then to the north of where that green dot is, that's the city-owned parcel that we're discussing this evening. The reason I'm looking to purchase that parcel, and I've been working with staff, is it kind of is a win-win for all parties involved. And so the reason I say that, and you'll see it on the next couple slides when we get there, is that there's a detention basin that's needing to go in for this site. And by picking that parcel up, which sits in floodplain today, so it doesn't really have a good use, it allows me to put a larger detention basin on there, which is a benefit for me because I can get a couple more units on my property. But why is that a benefit for the city? Is that it's my understanding in working with staff, the engineers, and some of the residents, that that neighborhood to the north there tends to flood every time a rain comes in. And by oversizing and putting that basin in the location it is, I'm not going to say it's going to solve their problems, but it is going to drastically help them going forward in that unless there's a real heavy rain event, they're probably no longer going to flood anymore. So it's a kind of a win-win for all parties. The residents, the city's making good use of that property, and it does benefit me as well. And I just wanted to show the engineering site plan. You can kind of see the basin on the north side there and how big it is and why it's, oversized for that. Because it wouldn't, if I just kept it on my site, it wouldn't need to be that big. But it's not going to help solve many problems either. Some of the subdivision highlights, just wanted to go down. There's 43 additional parking spaces. I plan to have streetlights in here. The HOA is going to maintain the green space throughout the community. These are going to be private streets and working with the city. However, they will be built to public street standards. And the reason I do that is I've learned over the years, when I go to turn this over to the residents of the HOA to maintain, it's a lot better to do it right up front, especially these days with the cost, than to try to go back and fix things and, make them happy on the back end. That gets a lot more costly. So to just do it right and do it to the city spec up front, even though it is private streets, it's just the right way to go. And then the price point on these units that we'll see in the next slide is going to be around the low 300s on average. That may go up depending on what the market does. But then there will be a landscape and entry monument at the front with irrigation and uplighting. And then on the next slide, I just showed, this is the landscape plan that was approved, and you can see the landscape all around the perimeter with trees and bushes of the site. There is a chance, after we get construction done and we get that all installed, that I may come back to you guys and look at decorative fencing in those locations as well too. So until we get construction done, I haven't made that final determination, but if I do, I'm definitely going to be coming back to you guys for approval. And then I just wanted to put some of the townhome renderings that we're expecting for the community. I hope they look nice to you guys. I think they look great, so I think they'll do very well in this location. And then there's another rendering on the next slide. And then one of the last things too is I am asking, I guess there is already a CRA in place for this area. And the reason I'm asking for that CRA in this project is unfortunately, you guys have seen construction prices and home prices continue to rise. They're never going in the right direction, which is down. They're always either staying flat these days or going up. And unfortunately, they continue to go up. So the CRA I'm going to look for is a 10-year 75% of the property taxes, which is what's in place. And then the reason for this is this will allow both me as the developer and the builder to try to pass on those savings on the property taxes to give the homeowners or the end buyer a more, still keep the end product affordable for the market. And I use affordable very sparingly because affordable now in this case is the low 300s. So, but with all that said, the homeowners will still have the obligation that they need to apply for this with the city once they have purchased and moved into their home. And then my construction schedule for the project, I am hoping to start, I've got a contractor already picked out for the site work. They're hoping if, you guys are in agreement and okay to purchase the adjacent property, then we're going to start moving, clearing, and grading the site here in November. In December timeframe, you'll see in January through April, them start to put in the pipes, the sanitary, the water, and the storm, depending on how good or bad of a winter we have. I'm hoping it's like last year, but we'll see. And then come the May, June timeframe, when the asphalt plants start to open back up, is when we would look to curb and pave the site, and then start selling in July of next year. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Are these townhomes similar to the Heathermere properties over there?
And for Chambersburg Road? Yes, similar.
Okay,
Different product, but a little similar.
yeah, okay. Do you know who the builder?
I am working with Ryan Holmes on that
Okay.
one, but a little different model product.
Those are nice townhomes.
They're all two-story. Let's see.
Correct. They will have a garage and two-story. Most will be 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths.
Do you have a projection for the property tax valuation, or the property valuation, I should say? We could figure out the tax obligations after we knew that. But do you have a projection for what the value of the property will be once the improvements are completed?
I just took a value of the total number of units times the house value. The expected house value came out to just a little over 30 million for
And
the
then
units.
The CRA benefit would be 75% of the improvements that you guys make,
On the property taxes.
25% going back to the, yes, of the
Cor-
of the
Correct,
taxes.
yes.
And 25% would still go to the political subdivisions that rely on the property tax
Correct.
throughout the course of that, regardless of if a 10-year 75% was granted or not.
Correct.
So they're still net new.
Yeah, and keep in mind, though, these are private streets, too, so the city's not going to be obligated for any additional work or assistance within the plat. So, they're still net new, for sure.
Questions for our presenter?
With that many, with that many houses going in, are we going to have to widen Glendine or put turn lanes or anything in for the,
So a turn lane for Springfield Street was required, and we are going to do a fee in lieu because we just made improvements to Springfield Street. So that is in the development agreement that we've been discussing with Mr. Oakes.
okay,
So in other words, we'll recover money to make that improvement at a later date.
okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And something also to note, this requires an application and review by the CRA Housing Council, so there is another step before it gets back to you.
And Ms. Holt, if I could, then, should this be approved, should a CRA be approved, there would be annual reporting that would be required by the property owner through the city and through the state.
That's correct.
So, this isn't just here you go, 10 years, run wild.
Nope.
Where there's still a large amount of monitoring, large amount of reporting. And that's something that I want folks to be aware of as we decide on, these things that are, could certainly be a positive for the community from the standpoint of revenue, but we also want to make sure that with that increased revenue, if there's increased responsibilities and services required, that we're making sound decisions. And certainly, for the political subdivisions in our community that rely on property tax, our schools, our libraries, Sinclair, Five Rivers, I've heard a lot from these folks in the last few weeks, that we're being mindful of a lot of those things that are happening, all those plates spinning at once. Mr. Manager, do you have anything to add from the standpoint of the city administration as we look at these
No,
questions?
Just in terms of next steps. So what you can expect next is that at the next business meeting, which is next week, we'll bring 2 items forward to you for consideration in furtherance of this plan. The first is a memorandum of understanding which is basically a light development agreement that says that, light meaning not very thick, a very brief agreement where we agree to continue working in good faith on the CRA piece and enter into the land exchange. The second piece of legislation that we'll bring to you is an ordinance to actually sell that parcel, that northern parcel for the stormwater basin. That agreement will have a buyback provision in it. So if for some reason market conditions change or something like that and the project is no longer viable, we would have the option to buy that land back and otherwise basically be back at square one with our ownership of that property at Glendine.
So are we selling the whole Glendine property or just a portion of that?
We're selling that, and that northernmost, the parcel that sits on the northern end,
So that the city will still own,
The other two.
correct.
okay, well, from my standpoint, it was all one big piece.
Yeah, yeah, there's three
Okay.
parcels that make up that stretch of Glendine.
There's
Yes.
three properties there? There's
Yes, that
three
we
parcels
own,
there?
and we're going to sell one of the three because, yes, that's the basin in between our engineer and the engineer that Mr. Oaks is
Okay,
using,
okay.
going back and forth.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't giving
Yeah.
up all our green space up.
No,
Correct.
Well, and I want to clarify too, that almost the majority of that property sits in floodplain.
Oh,
And so the
I know that property
Yeah, gotcha.
intimately, so.
yeah,
Mike would know better than most.
a detention basin is the highest and best use
I-
for that property.
I helped clear most of the honeysuckle off of that.
No, gotcha.
What, 10, 12 years ago, something like that.
yeah.
Is the, Josh, can you go back to that map?
sorry.
Thank you. Lot 20, which is just to the west of the primary lot that Mr. Oaks is speaking of, it's a wooded lot, there you go.
What's that red dot mean?
It's
That's
a
what
number.
I asked.
It's a, I think it's a number, I think it's number 20.
Yeah, that's the parcel
Um,
ID, yep.
Is that parcel part of your project, or is it independent from the project?
Now, that parcel was cut off. That's still owned by Mr. Poltz.
Okay.
There's some environmental issues and concerns with that property, in that back in the 20s or 30s, it was an old landfill. And so there's not a lot that can be done with that parcel. I would
Okay.
highly recommend a park
Or green space?
or green space.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, as I was looking at the county map, that that was reflective of what the site map you showed us was, so. And it's a nice buffer for the folks on Clairwood. But, thank you for that
Nope,
clarification.
absolutely.
Isn't there go back to the map, Josh.
No, I keep
Josh,
Right
back
along
to-
that, along that property line between what you now own and, isn't that a creek that runs there? Or, so your retention pond will kind of,
I'm not aware of a creek back there. I know as you go a little further up, it starts to meander and cut through because of the topography, but
Right.
where that spot is, I'm not aware of a creek.
I thought it ran right next to 781, between 781 and the Glendine property, because there was actually a land bridge there someplace. So you may want to check that.
Oh, I'll be very upset with my engineers and my surveyors if they've gotten it wrong at this point.
Because when it rains, there was a lot of water that ran down. through
Oh, no,
it.
that area would just flood,
Yeah.
so, and it probably did turn, and I do know there is a stream somewhere up there, I just don't think it, but I will absolutely check.
Okay, all right.
I will
I just want you to be aware.
No, I appreciate
My
that.
hope is, well, what it did was that all that water then came down and flooded these houses down on
Correct,
Clairwood. So
yeah.
my hope is that that would be then moved in and go into your retention pond and help them.
That's the
Or
plan.
some of it anyway.
So I'm not as familiar, but I am gonna trust my engineers to,
All right.
and they looked at that plenty.
Okay.
Okay,
good.
well, any other before Josh goes off of this map, I don't know why.
Sorry, Josh.
No, you're good.
I don't know where the obsession for maps came from all of a sudden, but we'll,
Can you
Well-
go back to that map real quick?
I knew it was coming.
So, any more questions for Mr. Oaks? And Josh, thank you for the next step outline, and we certainly thank you for coming and giving us this rundown and update. we'll look forward to the next steps with Josh.
Yep, no, thank you again, and I want to say thank you to staff, very much appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you guys next Thursday.
I do have one
Yep.
additional question. How many families do you think will be in this?
I think what you're going to find is a lot of young professionals and first-time families
Okay.
at this price point who want a little more square footage and don't want to rent.
Well, what I'm looking for is how many extra children the school system possibly will.
That's a tough one. I mean, I would say on average for this product, you would probably expect, what is it, about 1.5 kids for the development, so probably somewhere around 150 children for the school system, most probably younger children.
Right.
Or no children.
But at the same time, this is a unique property being close to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I could see a number of military families or military people coming in and looking to purchase as well. So it's a tough one up here with that
No,
dynamic
and I
of the
get it.
base.
We just need to keep an eye on it. We may want to think about, is there any place there across the street that we could run a sidewalk or walking path to
Stevenson.
Virginia Stevenson? Because I think it would be a positive thing for us to
A
do,
safety thing.
rather than them have to ride the bus all the way around.
Yeah, that would be one of those things where after the development goes in and we have a good sense of the demographics, we could easily look at Safe Routes to Schools funding, something like that, and use that kind of resource to get folks connected.
Exactly. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. I very much appreciate it, and I see you guys next Thursday.
Thank
Have
you.
a good evening. Thanks again,
Thanks.
Josh.
All right.
Next, we have Keith Valaket and Larry Sherman with ESG to present about the Wright Point Office Park.
Thanks, Josh.
I'll go ahead and,
Put the map up.
yeah.
Yeah, where's this?
Show that beautiful bean footage.
Roll it.
Roll it. Yeah, I don't know, I stole that picture. It's a beautiful picture of that building. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate the time. What we're going to present today, we hope, is a small but important step for development of the property as part of your comprehensive use plan. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we're planning on doing, kind of set the stage. I'm going to have Larry speak specifically about some of the improvements that we've talked to Josh about. So we started with a kind of a big wish list, and we kind of narrowed it down to what was critical and affordable, if you will. So on the first slide here, the building is, dates back to 1984. You made you acquired it in 2013. In fact, Larry and I, we were at Honeywell when that kind of happened, and we had some discussions. But, obviously you're at the end of life on a lot of systems in that building, including, or actually both these buildings, everything from the caulking, the window seals, the roofing, HVAC. Basically, nothing's been touched below the roof, if you will, as it relates to HVAC. You've got rooftops that are still in pretty good shape, still have some life in them. And some of the dating. So we're not touching the lobbies and things like that at this point, but we are doing some significant upgrades to bring the restrooms, not only bring them up to the kind of current standards, but also prepare them for ADA so that the building is ADA. So again, depending on which path you go down with the opportunity with the Westway or tenants or what have you, we believe these are very viable opportunities to improve the property for whichever path you go down without really throwing good money after bad. So do the core things that need to happen to either sell the buildings, drive tenants, or the SCIF space. So I think it provides you a lot of different opportunities. The roofs were replaced around 2004. The rooftops were from 2014. The roof, you're not going to get any more life out of it. They're done. The rooftops still have some life in it, so that's the good news. The projects that Larry's going to talk about is everything from once it leaves the rooftop unit, gets into it's basically a VAV system to distribute the air throughout the building controls, so you've got better control of the buildings, so you can adjust things and schedule things And the building envelope, everything from the bricks, sealing the brick, addressing the roof, as I mentioned before, the monitoring the restrooms, and then the parking lot lighting. So we helped and assisted with the city getting about a $300,000 grant from the state of Ohio through Brightening Ohio Communities to help improve the parking lot lighting, and that's just for the two buildings. So we look at this, we're kind of looking at this as a phased approach in terms of 2024 and 2025. And Josh, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but we've kind of, I'm not going to repeat everything on the screen, but we've kind of broken them into two different pieces. So I don't know if you want to
Yeah, just to briefly.
interject.
Sure, just to briefly chime in, there are really sort of two buckets of funding. The restroom modernization component is, of all these individual projects, it's the most expensive line item, if you will, out of all of them. And it's also one that I would say, if our strategy with Westway and our friends across the fence and in other places pans out, is I don't want to say it's of the least concern, but if we have a buyer or somebody that's going to come in and basically gut the insides of the building to turn it into whatever the customer wants, they can do restrooms as part of that, fairly easily. We're able to make more of a, I guess it's more of a sell if we're able to say, hey, the exterior and the bones are in great shape. The exterior and the bones are things like the roofs and the HVAC and the seals along the windows outside. For example, every time it rains, we have additional water damage over at 5100, and the Army gets water coming in on both sides of its window, of the unit that they lease over there. So we're very much at a point where the things that are in that 2024 column are the things that are most pressing, because every time something happens, we get a little bit more damage. The restrooms, if we were going to delay a little bit, or if we're trying to phase this, it makes most sense to push those into 2025. And I'll talk a little bit about how we sort of package the financing together a little later on, but I'll turn it back to Larry for some specifics about what each one of these projects looks like.
That'd be you.
Again, thank you all again for letting us present tonight. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'll try to keep it not too techy, but happy to go as deep as anybody wants on any of this stuff. So building envelope, like he said, your roofs, I kind of estimated they were replaced in 2004. We know they were replaced once, and that would seem about right. Typically, you put a roof in, it's good for 20 years. Well, you're at that 20-year mark on your second roof. And as Josh said, you're dealing with leaks, not just from the envelope, but from the roof itself. So what we tried to show there, the picture on the left and the top, those are actually of your roof. It's a ballasted style roof. It's just basically got gravel on it, and the roof just kind of floats. And what we'd be proposing is on the lower right there, kind of more of a membrane roof. White is the way to go in this climate. You get some reflective property, cuts down your air conditioning costs, things like that. Again, a 20-year warranty roof, you could expect probably more like 20 to 30 years out of it. The other thing we're doing is we're going to upgrade the insulation to R30. I forget which is which, but you're at maybe like R20 and R24, one building or the other. So while we're doing this, we'll add a little insulation to get it up to current code, save a little on the energy bill as well. We've got an allowance in there for some window repairs. Let me come back to that. Let me kind of jump to the bottom where the masonry repairs. No, stay on this map, Josh.
Yeah, I got you. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm getting itchy.
Part of the envelope is not just the roof, but also the vertical parts of the building. And, these buildings have got a lot of windows. Everywhere a window meets masonry, it has a caulk joint. A lot of those caulk joints are shot. That's a lot of your leakage that's coming in. We've got in here, we're cutting all that caulking out, recaulking, we're power washing all the brick, which is going to make it nice from an aesthetic standpoint. It's going to clean it up, but then actually applying a sealer on the brick as well, because brick is porous, so you do need to kind of seal it. Otherwise, water will eventually work its way in. So those are the two big components, the roof and the masonry repairs and sealing, the caulking and sealing the masonry. So we've got in there a little bit of money for window repairs. There's a spattering of windows where the seal has failed. We haven't done an inventory of them. but I'm guessing you guys get occasional tenant complaints on that, so we've got some money in here to address that, pretty much at the city's discretion. The other thing is, we've got some window film in the 5100 lobby only. If you go in there on a nice, bright, sunny morning, it's about 15 to 20 degrees warmer in the lobby than it is anywhere else. So this just kind of helps regulate that a little bit, more comfortable, and your air conditioning just doesn't have to work quite so hard. So any questions on anything building envelope related?
Is this typical of what we would expect for a building this age?
I'm sorry?
Is this typical of what we would expect from a building of this age, kind of regardless?
I would think so. Like I said, 20 years is pretty typical on the roof. A ballasted roof it's a good roof, but it's about as cheap a commercial roof as you can get. So the fact that you've gotten 2 times 20 years out of that system, you're doing, I mean, I'm assuming you got 20 years out of the first one, and based on that assumption, you got 20 years out of this one, so you're right where you need to be. The roof definitely goes. You know, the caulking, I mean, think about it, 40 years, these buildings are 40 years old, so, you know, if you read the tube of caulk from Home Depot, it says 50-year warranty. Mine doesn't last 50 years at home when I use it, so, I think the short answer is yes.
So, in my mind, this is kind of like cost of doing business. If we're going to be owning buildings, this is part of what comes up, but thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
I was happy that you mentioned power washing because for some time, I've wanted to talk about it, but because it needs it bad.
It does. It's hard to justify to make it look pretty, but since we're there working on it anyway,
I'm glad you've
We're doing
included
it.
that. Thank you.
next slide, please. Thank you. Parking lot lighting, Keith mentioned we were instrumental in helping the city obtain the Brighton, Ohio Communities Grant, and that included the parking lot and then the building facade, not on all sides, but on, I think the sides facing Springfield Street, there's actually uplighting on these buildings. The 2 pictures on the top, the one on the left is the floodlight. It's actually been retrofit, I use the term loosely, not retrofit very well, but retrofit to LED. You can see that the product used is got burn marks in it and failed. We're replacing those with fixtures, the fixture on the bottom there, more appropriate. And then the parking lot lights as well, again, before and after, top and bottom. Just want to point out there's 2 lighting systems in your parking lot. We've got, it's 28 fixtures, I think like 20 poles. Some of them got 2 heads on them that are associated with Right Point 1 and Right Point 2. There are some taller poles and fixtures that are associated with Right Point 3 that's not part of this project. So just want to make you aware of that so you don't think we did half a project. You know, those aren't maintained and owned by you, but they're going to look really dingy after we do what we do because your parking lot's going to look really nice. So.
Have
That's
they
right.
been offered the opportunity to join in the party?
We don't have a relationship with them, so I don't know.
Yes, those conversations have occurred.
I would hope so.
Okay, next, thank you. HVAC and controls, 2 components to this. One is, like Keith mentioned, the rooftop units or the big units on the roof. Those are all replaced in 2014. That was kind of the easy part, if you will. It's also the part that when it breaks and you don't have any air conditioning. But below the roof, there are 227 VAV boxes and associated thermostats that go with those. Those were never touched. They're 40 years old. They're still operated with pneumatic controls. It's getting hard to find technicians that can work on that stuff. Our first crack at this on the VAV boxes, we looked at actually retrofitting them, or not retrofitting, but kind of upgrading them, replacing the parts that typically fail. I mean, it's just a box with some dampers and a resistance coil, electric reheat. And in part because of the age and the price for the replacement parts, it got to be more cost effective just to replace them. So that's what we're doing. We're replacing those. And then the controls that are connected to those, Again, the top pictures is a pneumatic thermostat. I took it right out here in the hall the other day. And then the one on the right is more, it's actually what you see in this space. Your space, when you guys moved in here, these boxes were replaced. We do not have those in the scope. We know they're new. And the controls are digital controls, and we won't be replacing these actually, that's not true. We were going to replace these. There's such a small number of them, it just makes sense to go common with controls throughout. But, so the thermostats will probably look a little different, but it's the same idea. It's a digital thermostat. But then the big benefit of the way you manage buildings like this nowadays is the screenshot on the bottom, and that happens to be one I pulled out of a project we just did in Vandalia a couple years ago. But with that, you'll be able to manage your building, manage all the spaces. If you're getting complaints from tenants, that's the first place you can go and take a look and see what's going on. The system we're putting in is I don't want to call it a generic system, but it's not a proprietary system. It's a system, you use MSD a lot for your maintenance here. They're very familiar with this system. We're not trying to take that away from them. You can continue to use them to maintain the system, but this will give you, as the building owner, a lot more understanding what's going on in your building and the ability to manage it as well. Scheduling, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with this. You don't want to get too much detail, but you can also kind of control how much local control you have at each of these thermostats. So just kind of gets you up into the 2000s, frankly. Increased comfort and scheduling. I know you guys deal with a lot of issues that are related to both the VAV boxes and the controls that are, frankly, just way beyond their useful life. So.
One other thing on this, Larry, too, is that if I'm not mistaken, if you go up in this building onto the second floor and you hear what sounds like a lawnmower or a rocket ship or a car revving its engine really loud, that is the compressor for the pneumatic system.
That's correct.
And that will go away if we
Yes.
make this upgrade.
Yes.
Which incidentally, like, I mean, I've walked by up there and kind of felt like I needed to duck because it sounds like the whole thing's going to come out of the closet and like attack you. But I will say that not only would we see performance improvements, but if we are trying to show space in this building, it doesn't sound very good when it sounds like the closet is going to shake itself out of the facility. So an indirect benefit is that for any future user, it just creates a more inviting and comforting space because you don't have all that racket.
And the fact that it's located right next to the elevator, if you're riding the elevator when that thing comes on, it doesn't give you much comfort either.
Yeah, no, it's a little disconcerting. Yeah, no problem.
And you've got the same thing over in 5100, it's just in a more remote place, so it's not as noticeable. But yes, we're looking for a home for those compressors, if anybody needs one in the garage when we do this project, so.
Well, actually,
Actually, I need them for the haunted house.
okay. Well, Stebbins High School has
Yeah.
an HVAC program,
Okay,
a full program where students get their certifications and everything. So he might be interested in using that as a tool, or even coming over here as they do install for students to learn.
Or take it out,
That'd be wonderful.
the
Yeah.
whole process.
And I would love to see that incorporated
Yeah,
somehow.
we'll build a connection there for sure.
yeah, absolutely, love to. Yeah, we do not like to fill landfills with the stuff we take out if we don't have to, so. Any other questions on the HVAC? Restrooms, Josh kind of talked about that a little bit. Picture on the top is actually of one of your restrooms, the one on the bottom is kind of a rendering. They were built in the 80s and they look like they're built in the 80s, so part of what we're doing is trying to make them look a little more modern. We do have an architect on our team that we're using to actually design these spaces, get away from the touch controls to all touchless controls, solid surface countertops and partitions as opposed to the laminate that's in there now. I mean, it's functional, but it's dated, very dated. So we're trying to upgrade everything. Plus, like you heard before, right now these restrooms are not ADA compliant in any way. So in 5100, we were going to. We actually have the room over there. We're going to take over a janitor closet on the first, third, and fourth floor, and we can kind of expand the existing restrooms. The problem is, for the handicap stall, you need a bigger area than what you have. So by expanding into the existing closet, we can create that space. And the reason we're doing it on floors 1, 3, and 4, the code says you just have to be able to get to an ADA restroom within one floor of where you are, up or down. So we're putting 3 over there. Why aren't we putting them 1, 3, and 5? That janitor's closet I mentioned on the 5th floor over there has a lot of equipment in there that would be very costly to try to relocate. So by putting them 1, 3, and 4, regardless of which floor you're on, you're within one floor of an ADA compliant restroom. Over here, we don't have the ability to do that, so what we're actually doing on the 1st and 3rd floor is adding a family ADA compliant restroom right next to the existing ones. So it'll actually be 3 restrooms on the 1st and 3rd floors. And then we're still modernizing all the existing restrooms as well. Yeah, complete demo back to the studs. I mean, we're pretty much, we're gutting these things. The touchless fixtures we talked about, new floor and finishes. And then exhaust fan upgrades. You've got some exhaust issues in your restrooms. They're all, each column of restrooms is on a common fan up on the roof, but there's some issues with those systems. Kind of leads to some unpleasant odors, whatever. We've got some money in there to try to take care of that and restore that function.
Are you doing anything with the door width on the restrooms when you're making them ADA compliant?
If necessary, yes. I don't have a specific answer, but
Okay.
if necessary, yes. I think they probably, I'm going to defer to my architect who's not here, but he's designing it and he's certainly aware of those requirements.
I would think the ADA, or the American with Disabilities Act, was passed in like 71 or 72. I would imagine that the door widths would be where they should be, but I don't want to say that they are.
I can just say, functionally, the restrooms that I've been in this building don't seem to be wide enough for
I think they also need
wheelchairs.
ingress and egress that can be
Yes.
mechanized,
Yes.
which is
And-
not there.
And if the ADA requirements are, if we can get away with doing things that maybe aren't necessarily functionally, I would ask that maybe we do something with the extra restrooms that are built to just make sure that those have nice wide doors, if possible.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And
You know,
I-
those fancy flusher things don't work when electricity doesn't work.
Yeah, they do.
No, they don't.
They're battery
I
powered.
found that out on my last trip driving through the
battery
Heritage. Because the places that were not shut down for electricity and the North Carolina Welcome Station, you couldn't use the restrooms because of no electricity. So they don't work.
That is true, and to your point, Mr. Denny,
Yes.
you can install it either way, either 115 volt or battery. We have this designed as 115 volt because
Okay.
our experience has been the batteries go dead and don't get changed more often than the electricity
Exactly.
goes
That-
out.
I was going to
All I can
ask
tell
that
you is I
question.
was at a Love Station and the North Carolina Welcome Station, and neither one had power.
I'm sure. So I will look into the door width issue and get back with Josh on that, get you some more definitive feedback. It's a great question.
Thank you.
I'm just, again, our architect's very experienced. I'm sure he's got that considered, but we'll get you some more
Well, this
feedback.
cabinetry that's around the personal areas, I'm sure that that's a box program, and the
It depends.
handicap door would be the wide one at the back, according to this picture.
Yeah, I think there really are 2 door widths to consider, and again, I'm also not an architect, but insofar as, yes, the stall width is one consideration, the actual entry door is the other. I mean, I think the architect will design to code, and we'll make sure that we've got the appropriate widths.
Yeah, and another minor thing is the signage is all off too, so that'll get taken care of as well, just to make sure it's well known which is which.
Yep, so.
I just can't use
what-
the restroom when the power's off.
One of
They're
the,
driving in the storm anyway.
Have you considered a backup generator for these buildings?
one other thing to note, and Larry, you might have been going here next, though, is that in this building in particular, one of the trade-offs we will make in order to make the first floor ADA accessible is it will encroach into what is now what I will loosely call our fitness center. So we will end up effectively, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we basically will end up consuming some of that space, what is currently locker room space, to put in more of a family-style ADA accessible restroom. And at that point, we'll essentially be vacating our locker room as an amenity. However, it is one of those spaces that, depending on where our strategy pans out, I would suggest would likely to be repurposed for something else anyway, if this building changes hands or we get directions that we want more, let's say, secure space. That kind of an amenity is not likely, especially in its present form, to persist based on the strategy we've got, so.
I didn't even know there was a fitness room.
If you've not been, I'll take you on a tour. It'll be very brief. And if you,
I wasn't aware there was
if you're
one.
not in
Yeah, but
love
then
with
there's adjacent bathrooms
1980s
and
exercise
showers.
equipment, you will be after
Yes.
the.
Adjacent
I'm not
bathrooms and showers,
intimately,
too.
I'm not intimately aware of any fitness equipment.
Yes, it
kinda
is a
nice.
trip, so.
The last thing I'll mention, I know the slide's about restrooms, and I think Keith said we're not doing anything in the lobbies. Not entirely true. We are doing wall and ceiling repair in the lobbies and kind of the common areas, the hallways, the non-leased spaces. If you look real closely, a lot of those show evidence of the water leakage over the years. So we're just trying to, and the color scheme, kind of get that. If you're painting it, you might as well paint it a modern-looking color anyway. Again, that's the architect's gig, so he'll tell us what to do. But we do have money in there to fix wall ceilings and a nice coat of paint, freshen them up a bit. Okay. So I think that's the end of my part. We're not sure where you want to go from here. Any other questions we can answer?
We've got one more slide that just kind of breaks down the financing elements here, just a little bit more detail. So just to briefly cover this, again, this is an approximate itemization about how much each one of these individual elements or projects costs. So as I said kind of at the beginning, the restroom modernization is the project with the biggest price tag. That would be the one that we would push out to next year. The total cost is right around $6 million. The grant that we would receive is a reimbursable grant, so we still need to front the money for the exterior lights, and then we would be paid back for that. But the net investment in the buildings is right around $5.7 million. The current approach, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next presentation when I get really into budget stuff, but the current approach is essentially that we have about $500,000 left in ARP money that I can reallocate to this purpose. We have a little over $7.5 million in fund balance in our general fund, and I would recommend appropriating $3.5 million for this project. That would leave us with about $4 million in the bank, so to speak, which is still enough to tide us over for at least a year if the police levy were not to be renewed. And the balance of this project, the remaining $2 million, we would basically increase our debt service for these buildings by about $2 million next year and effectively finance the restroom component. And we can get more into those weeds in the next sort of presentation too, but I think the main idea would be to effectively pay cash upfront for the most critical items that we can get started on most quickly, and then to use debt service for the other component being the restrooms next year.
It's no secret my feelings on these buildings. We know that, right? But it's my understanding that whether we keep these buildings for tenants or sell these buildings, we're going to have to make these upgrades anyways, correct?
Yeah, and I probably should have led with that
And
at
we're
the
going
beginning.
to lose the money if we go to sell it.
Correct.
Because they're going to ask for this to happen. Right?
Yes, I mean, it's, and especially in the conversations that I've had with Mr. Meter, our leasing agent, we are very much at a point where everybody knows that the buildings are 40 years old, and everybody can make reasonable guesses based on what you see outside and when you come in these buildings. If you go to the lobby at 5100 and look up, you'll know that the roof leaks. If you come in here, actually in the corner office in our front conference room, you'll know that we have window seal issues because the tiles are all brown. And we replace them, but every time it rains, water comes back in. So these are the kinds of improvements that either upfront or during a due diligence period, a landlord is going to come right back to us and say, well, I'm going to have to sink, $4 or $5 million into the buildings just to bring them up to a place where they're at a bare minimum leasable. I'm going to knock that off of my purchase price. So we are still very much, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, but we're at a place where my recommendation would be that if the choice is sell the buildings at either a loss or for a very minimal profit without making these improvements, or make the improvements and that lets us, A, command a higher sales price, or B, if our strategy with Westway doesn't pan out and we need to solve other facility problems, I would rather recommend to you that, yes, we should bring the police department into the other side of this building, and we know that's a good idea because we've already invested in the roof over our own heads. That's one less facility expense we have to make in the future. That's a trade-off that's worth considering.
Do we have any type of an estimate of the value, it would increase the value of these buildings, making these improvements or anything like that?
I don't have a professional real estate opinion on that necessarily, but what I will say is there are two ways we can leverage this investment. The first is in our public-private partnership arrangement with Westway. We have a clause in there that recognizes that if we make capital improvements in these facilities, that creates a hook for us to re-engage them on conversations about price point and lease price. So I can invoke that and say, hey, I'm about ready, we are about ready to make these investments in the buildings. Let's renegotiate a sales price. We can also then fairly, if that should fall through, we could fairly represent to any other party that we've made these investments in the bones of the buildings, and that we would need to be compensated in some form or fashion for that to help us recoup those costs.
And if I could add, Josh, because of that clause, we've actually been through this scope in detail with Westway to make sure they're comfortable in backing up these investments and that these improvements don't interfere with anything they would do converting this to skip space. So we've kind of checked that box along the way.
Okay.
Yeah, if we're not putting anything in that they will come back through and rip out. So it is, we're trying to be as proactive and as effective stewards of taxpayer dollars as far as investing in these buildings as we possibly can. So again, that's kind of the thought process behind go ahead and make the upfront investment, especially if we have a little bit of fund balance to support it, without putting ourselves at increased risk over the long term. Any other questions for Larry or Keith? Or me? Cool. Well, so the tentative plan is this. The next steps, we will talk a little bit about the specifics of the budget next, but the main idea is that because our recommendation currently is to use reserves, come out of pocket for the $3.5 million that we've discussed for the first phase of this, we will prepare a supplemental ordinance, since that was not originally in the budget this year. We will read it twice. I don't intend to rush anybody through this process. We will prepare that and bring it to you at the next business meeting. The second reading would be November 7th, which is after the election. So if for some reason we need to pivot or change course, we will still have the opportunity to do that. We would also bring the contract with ESG to the November 7th meeting, so that if all pans out, then we basically will be at a position where November 7th, we have all the money lined up and the contract is signed, and we can start work very shortly thereafter on the first phase of these improvements.
Yeah, we'd really like to get your roof replaced before the heavy winter weather hits.
All right.
All right,
Thank
are
you.
there any other questions for Josh or for our presenters? Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
No, you guys are good to go. Thanks, gents.
Might add that, staff we took the ball from staff on the grants, and staff helped get part of the way down the line, we helped them finish it, so.
Yes.
I don't want to take any credit away from staff on that grant.
No, I think
We did
that's
single-handedly do it. so.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, the Downing Group and Naya and Lori and her team were also pretty helpful in
Lori.
actually, and Lori
Don't
in,
forget Lori.
in sourcing the Brightening Ohio grant, and Keith and
We just carried
ESG
it right across the goal line.
exactly carried the football from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So the next item we have is a discussion item for the UDO text amendment for urban agriculture, also known as the chicken ordinance.
And community gardens.
Yeah, and there is a community garden provision in there as well. So the long and short of this is I mostly wanted to get a temperature check from folks. As folks may know, we spent probably 9 months, almost a year.
18 months of
18 well,
research. Yeah.
longer than I remember.
Too
but
long.
A long time. Crafting with the Planning Commission an approach to thinking about urban chickens, and did a bunch of research with peer communities and developed an ordinance with some suggested changes regarding urban agriculture. The Planning Commission ultimately did not vote to recommend that to council. So at this point, we basically have two options. The first is we can still bring you that ordinance for an up or down vote or for other additional discussion. But in talking with folks on Planning Commission, on council, with staff and others, I think it's also important to remember that we are essentially in the middle of a land use or a land code, zoning code rewrite process. And I think that there is an opportunity for us, rather than bring you the ordinance, we could effectively ask our consultant who is helping us rewrite our land use code what they've seen, if they have recommendations about how to bake this into the new code rewrite, and then based on that recommendation, move forward and act on that. The only caution I would have about that is the land use code rewrite is a comprehensive process, and I wouldn't want urban agriculture to become, I guess, like a poison pill, if you will, or something that would be an obstacle for people to vote against the entirety of the land use code. Having said that, if it is still highly contentious, we can always consider it again as an independent item, even after we get through the land use code rewrite process. So the short way of asking this is, do you still want to consider an independent ordinance in the short term? Or would you rather think about this in the context of the broader code rewrite and move the process forward from there?
Plan B.
Plan B from Brenda.
What did she say?
She said.
I said Plan B.
Plan B.
To me, it makes all the most sense to just do it all as a whole instead of just doing it separately, because why do one little thing and then sooner than later, hopefully, we'll be doing the entire land use plan, so the zoning rewrite, so I don't see why we wouldn't wait.
I'm okay with making it part of the zoning rewrite, but here's my thought about if we would pass the ordinance, if it would pass, if we brought it forward and it would pass, it would give us a, test case for a while until the new stuff gets written, and give us some information, maybe a little more information on what exactly the community is looking for in general. I think all they're really looking for is the ability to have 6 hens in their backyard as pets and possibly get a few eggs. But it would give us a chance to see, okay, are we going to have 30 people do this, or are we going to have 300 people do this? And it might give us a better view on how loosely or tightly we need to write our new code. But I think that's a discussion for the whole group, not just, so that was my only thought about going ahead and passing the existing ordinance, is that it would get it, and people have been waiting for a long time to be able to do this, and there's been very many discussions on Facebook about, can you have, I think it's every 3 or 4 weeks I see somebody asking if you can or can't. And so, if we had some way to temporarily permit it, saying, okay, we're going to permit it, but it could go away because I know also that
But you're talking about people's pets.
Yeah,
Like-
I know.
So there's
And
not-
all
it's not very temporary.
all it would really mean is they couldn't get any more. So they would sort of be grandfathered in. So I don't know. That's my thought. We can go from there.
I serve as an ex officio on Planning Commission, and I was involved with a lot of the discussions. I'll quote Jesse for a moment. I think he said my opinions on the building are well established. I think maybe some of my personal opinions on where this issue maybe should go are pretty well established. I don't always hold back when I have an opinion, but I also am a very diligent believer in process. And I think that what Plan B, as Brenda called it, would provide us with is a deliberate and well laid out process by which we can look at the community as a whole with all the things that go into what makes a city, which land use and proper zoning and things like setbacks and things like what people who work with NIA and NIA's expertise know what load management is when it comes to the amount of space you need for certain uses. And I mean, I'll be very honest. The Planning Commission had a couple different proposals that were in front of them, and I thought at one point that a proposal that the staff had presented was I don't want to say moderate, but it was a well thought out and well laid out and well reasoned way to accommodate some of these requests we've had in the community. And it seemed like the end vote, the language that was voted on ultimately was not necessarily a deliberate and well laid out process. And that's not anything to do with the staff's ability to do that. That staff was basically said, no, we want to go much, much further than this and just give anybody who wants to have these chickens, give them chickens. And I'm paraphrasing a bit, and that's how I read the situation. I do think that with the staff we have in place, with the group that we have helping us with the land use plan and the code rewrite, that this is the best time to have these discussions, but it should be had in terms of the entire city and the entire review of how we want to live in neighborhoods and how we want to live near different uses. Because in my mind, what it comes down to is if you move to a house in a neighborhood, what is essentially the bargain that you're taking part in when you move there? And if my neighbor all of a sudden started welding in his garage and I thought, well, maybe he's just a hobby of his, and then all of a sudden there's semis there every other morning dropping off sheet metal and the welding operation grows a little bit, I'm like, well, I thought this was residential. He's doing a lot of welding there. And then all of a sudden there's customers picking up stuff. I would think, okay, well, this is an industrial use in a residential area. That's not why I moved here. And I think that those conversations with our community, which is what we're in the middle of, are the conversations that we should be having when we look at things like urban agriculture. And it does include community gardens. It does include ways that people can provide sustenance for their families on their property. And I'm not running from that conversation, but I do think that it should happen in the deliberate, orderly, well laid out fashion that MKSK plans to do, and it's in the middle of doing. And I don't want to just jump and say, let's do this and give it a trial. As Brenda said, these are going to become pets. It's going to be hard to put that toothpaste back into the tube if in my mind, if we went that direction. But I do think, thankfully, we're in the middle of this. We're taking steps in this process of going through all land uses, all property types, not just looking at a one-off. So I certainly agree with Brenda. I think that we should take the opportunity with our UDO rewrite and look at urban ag and look at what our neighbors are doing, what other cities across the country that are similar size are doing. And that's where the discussion should be guided by. And I would live with the result if I felt like we were getting there the right way. And I think that gives us the best chance to get there the right way, is if we go through the best practices that are being laid out by our planning consultants. Sarah, did you have your hand up?
I was at the last meeting when the vote was taken, and I feel like that we have trouble enough getting people to serve on those committees, and they voted not to go forward. So I think that we want to ask people to voice their opinion and get involved, and then that's what they do, and then we step all over them, then maybe that's not a real smart idea either. So I would support letting sleeping dogs lie.
Well, then.
How's that temperature check going,
No, I
Josh?
think that's good. I think that, no, actually, that's helpful. So, I mean, if I heard, I think what I haven't heard is consensus to bring it forward. So I think what we will do is table it for the time being, and then, obviously, if circumstances change, then we can have a conversation about agenda and everything else. But in the meantime, we will get with ZoneCo
Yeah.
and let them know that this is a specific topic that we want to look at
Yeah.
in detail.
I'll just talk more about that process too. So I did give an update, but I'll just give you an overall of what that time frame looks like. So right now, we're in phase 1, and that's narrowing down what our approach is or what type of zoning code our community needs. Because right now, as you know, our code is trying to fit that circle in that square hole. So that's what phase 1 is. And then as we get to phase 2, which is developing that code, they asked if we could find topics like this or other areas of concern or touch points that they wanted to tee up for them as we're going into phase 2. And phase 2 is supposed to start at the beginning of 2025. So we'll start developing that code as in the middle of January next year. So we're moving fast. We're already in the process. So if we have that list, we'll put that right on there.
And I want to say that I'll commit to a good faith discussion around these items, even if I might have my own opinions. I certainly want to know, and I would hope all of us would, we want to know what the community is telling us and what best practices also guide us towards. So, I mean, I think that's certainly something that we're in a good spot to be in the middle of this process, and I don't want people to think that we're just going to forget about these conversations, because, as Mike said, they have come up, and we should be considering them, we should be discussing them. And that's where I'm hoping that we'll be able to land with our partners that are guiding us through this.
Sounds good. I will then pivot to our next item, which is an update on the FY25 budget. Bear with me here. Okay, so I want to sort of preface this by just kind of setting expectations for this evening. So we have already begun the work of asking departments to make budget requests, having them load them into the budget, and then starting to go through and vet those numbers. Since this is our first year really through that element of this process, there's a lot of legwork involved in that we will continue to do. So what I'd like to do this evening is really just touch base with the group about some of the larger budget assumptions that we are working with. And a good example is the conversation we just had with Keith and Larry at ESG about Rock Point. We're going to talk a little bit about that in here too. But I do think it's important to remember, I know I lean on this quote a lot, but the quote by John Muir, I think, is especially relevant and will continue to be relevant as we move forward through this and future budget processes, which is that it's impossible in any context, but particularly in a municipal budget, to pick out one thing by itself and not have it impact other things. So when we talk about how a police renewal is important, you can't isolate that from the rest of the budget. If that doesn't happen, then it has consequences on the other side of the budget and other departments. So a good case in point, a good reminder that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we're working with a pie that is of a certain size, and we're trying to do the best we can with that pie. So the other thing that we're trying to be very, very deliberate about, and I'll give ClearGov actually some credit. A lot of their templates actually have and they continue to build these out, a section where you can connect your budget to individual strategic goals. In the budget that we adopted for this year, there is a page devoted to our strategic plan. It's just a summary of the strategic plan that council passed in 2022. I have it on good authority from the developer that they are continuing to build out their software capabilities so that you can actually connect individual budget lines or projects to strategic goals. I'm hopeful that'll be something that we'll be able to show you during the next budget cycle, but they are building that capability as we speak. Having said that, I think it's important to remember that the strategic plan that we crafted in 2022, council actually adopted in early 2023. And that plan really focused on four strategic focus areas, which were governance, infrastructure, public safety, and economic development. And under each of those, the plan identifies several subcategories of focus areas, if you will, or sub-focus areas that support those larger goals. The opportunity that we have the next time we revisit a strategic plan is to really get more in the weeds in the next strategic planning process to actually define specific goals and initiatives that we can deliver on and allocate our budget, orient our budget to. But in the meantime, there are, and I apologize, this slide got cut off here a little bit. In the meantime, the council has certainly given me goals. As we've discussed all year, we've been through a process, a class comp study, and moved forward on implementing a merit pay system. Part of that involves goal setting. I've asked all the departments to prepare goals for themselves and their direct reports. And some of those goals are listed here. What I've tried to do is sort of line up between all the goals that staff are working with right now. And some of those goals continue to evolve, I will say. Like, we haven't fully finalized those department goals, but the bones of it are here. I'm trying to illustrate how we are aligning our goals with where the council's strategic focuses and priorities are. And so, I'm not going to read all of these, but some good examples are things like when we think about infrastructure design, all of the work that we've done in the Woodman corridor aligns with and supports that goal. And the funding that we've gotten from Congressman Turner's office will help us continue to support that goal. All of these goals are directly or indirectly supported in this year's budget and in the budget that we're preparing for you for 2025. Whether that is, if you think about, for example, down in public safety accountability, one of the things I want to try to move the needle on next year is improving our real-time data tracking. The fees that we pay to Huber Heights for dispatch services and to our software providers for RMS, and computer services that crunch those calls and let us generate call reports and pie charts and call logs, all go to support our ability to be able to give you that information and to develop those capabilities in real time. So you will see something very similar to this in the 2025 budget when we develop that budget book and publish it. So moving on to assumptions. For revenue assumptions, one of the first ones I wanted to run by you has to do with income tax. So this graph should be somewhat familiar. This is the quarterly graph that we've been producing that sort of tracks how our income tax receipts have come in over the last several years. The blue bar is what we collected in 2022. These are actual collections. The peach or pink bar is what we collected in 23, and this mustard-looking bar, I don't know how these colors were selected by PowerPoint. This is what we've actually done in 2024.
It's blue, pink, and green.
Fair enough. Maybe I'm looking at the screen from the side, so it's getting distorted. But at any rate, the main takeaway here, I think, is that if you compare the 22 to 24, our collections, by and large, have been better than they were in 2022. And except for the first quarter, we've collected more than we did last year. Obviously, fourth quarter is still in progress. We still have, I think, 2 anticipated disbursements in October and then 2 more in November and December. But the point being, we had budgeted for $9.8 million in collections this year. If the current pattern in the year continues, we'll probably collect closer to 10. And we collected about 10 last year. So we are comfortable making a budget assumption that we'll probably collect 10 again next year. We'll basically hold the actual revenue plan flat. And if we make that assumption, we will show in the budget that the general fund would get about $4 million out of income tax collections. The remaining 60% we would divide evenly. So of that $6 million that's left, 3 would go to police, 3 would go to fire. And then we're still living into that 40-60 split and also evenly distributing the public safety funds among both of those departments. Also, we will continue the practice of having each fund pay for its own collection costs. So we pay about 3% to CCA for service fees when we collect income taxes, and we'll continue to divide those costs as we have been before. Any heartburn about making an assumption about $10 million based on? Okay. So we will roll with that. Other revenue assumptions. Big shout out to Kim Baker. We've had a couple of discussions so far this year where we have been much more proactive about investing our resources in a way that's productive for the city. So I'll make a note here that currently we have roughly $9 million in cash that's invested, or am I speaking out of turn? I know I'm looking at you off the, like out of the blue.
We have 10 million in Star, Ohio, and about 2.4 in Fifth Third.
Okay, thank you. So the Star Ohio account currently is at $10 million. We ran some math and actually assumed that if we had to draw that down, and we only left $6 million invested. So again, if you imagine part of the appropriating $3.5 million to pay for Right Point improvements is going to lower our cash balance that's invested. Even if we only had $6 million left, and even if interest rates fell, again, to something like 3.5%, that would be about $210,000 in interest that we would make over the course of next year. So we're making that assumption as well, that we will leave at least $6 million invested, and the Fed could drop the rates as low as 3.5%, and we'll continue to book those revenues then into the general fund. We will assume that the police levy continues. So we will assume that the police levy is renewed. If circumstances change, I will make some changes to this budget assumption before you get your first draft of the budget book in early November. And aside from that, our plan is to hold all of the other revenues basically steady. So we're not going to assume major increases or decreases, but what we will do is look at what happened in 2023 and what's happened so far this year. And if we think that number needs to go up or down a bit, we'll make those minor adjustments to all of the revenue lines. Any questions on the revenue side? Okay. Expenses. This is the fun one. All right, so personnel. We're going to assume that we are fully staffed. And I'll note that I think for the first time since I've been here, we're on the verge of being fully staffed. We have one vacancy in the police department, but we've made an offer for that position. So there's a really good likelihood that by the time we get into January, all of our full-time positions will be filled. We're going to assume they stay filled all year, and we're going to assume that we employ as many part-timers as we have budgeted in the past. We'll also assume that we're implementing the contractual increases that we are required to pay for union contracts, and we've made assumptions in here for merit pay for non-union employees. According to our personnel module in ClearGov, that's about $200,000 in wages. There are other costs because we have to pay, like our pension costs go up, correspondingly. And then in addition to that, I would like to make some assumptions about a few additional positions. And really there are three. The first is a full-time fire inspector, which would be a 40-hour administrative position in the fire department. That position would have a pretty critical role in day-to-day review of plans and permits that come in for developments. And if some of the larger developments that have been floated start to take off, that will create, we will have to go inspect those developments for compliance with the fire code, because it's our fire department, it's our responsibility to enforce the fire code.
the law.
And it's the law. We will have to do that. The county will do the building inspections, but we will have to do fire. So part of that position's job would be day-to-day plan permit review as well as inspections as developments go forward. And then if that work for some reason doesn't materialize, there's plenty of prevention work that can be done with respect to pre-planning and, checking and just regular run-of-the-mill fire inspections at businesses to be sure folks are compliant. Questions about fire inspector? All right. The next position that I'd like to create and hire for is a utility billing specialist. That position is unique. If we are going to start spinning up a stormwater utility fee, this would be the person that is responsible for maintaining all of the stormwater utility asset information. So they would be managing the GIS map that shows how much impervious surface area every business has. If you're a resident, you come in with an application for a reduced fee amount, they would process those applications. If we continue with the utility billing concept and we decide to start billing for trash services, they would manage that trash contract and all the billing associated with trash. And basically, all the data that we would need to feed the billing system itself, and then help manage and ensure the bills go out, that would be this person's job. For at least the first year, the general fund will need to support this position. But after we get stormwater utility fees set up, and if we start billing for trash and set up a corresponding trash fund, then those utility funds could pay the salary and benefits of this position, because that will basically be all the work that they're doing.
So it wouldn't be money we'd be taking from another spot any longer.
Correct.
To support it.
Yes, so in other words, there's a startup cost for at least the first year, potentially the first year and a half or two, but then after that, we should have everything in place, and it would basically be fully funded by the utility fees themselves.
Then could we reimburse the general fund for the startup money?
Probably not, because that would cross budget years, is my
Okay.
guess. As nice as that would be.
It's a good thought.
Yeah. The final position is an administrative assistant for community development. And this, I think, it creates a lot of wins inside this building on a few levels. The first is, we had the community development department do what we call lovingly a desk audit earlier this year, where I had Ashley and everybody who covered for her at the front desk write down, not necessarily who came in, but whoever came in or called, what did they call about? Which department were they asking for? Was it by phone? Was it in person, et cetera? And the main takeaway from that is that the bulk of the work that has come in tends to be community development related, whether it's a code complaint or a permit. Of course, we get people asking questions about income tax and everything else, but for the most part, that position has really been a front-facing role for community development-related issues. So we would hire an administrative assistant essentially to sit where Ashley sits now at the front desk. And they would be able to help Naya. Naya doesn't have any administrative assistance at all, so she's basically doing all of her own requisitions, POs, procurements, all of that other lifting is done purely by her. So it would give her somebody that could help carry that water. On the back end of the house, what it does is we would plan on sort of converting the existing position. Basically what it is right now, the city manager's administrative assistant would become more of an HR assistant role. And that's for two reasons. Out of all of the departments that are in this building, HR is the only one where I only have one person. And if April wins the lottery and decides she's not going to come into work anymore, I don't have anybody else around here that can do HR. I'll be contracting out or hiring an attorney. Both of those are fairly expensive. If she were to get sick or something, it would help to have somebody else who can process intake, do adjustments, maybe take a little bit of payroll off of finance's plate, and who has basically the confidentiality privileges to look at some employee files and help manage some of that work so that we have a little bit of redundancy. So we would bring that position into the back and expect that it would cover for the front desk if needed, but it would basically buy us a little bit more capacity at only a slightly incremental cost compared to what we're paying now. So all in all, among those positions, it's about $311,000 in total comp that we're budgeting for. That's a conservative budget estimate, meaning we are planning on the most expensive health insurance plans, for example. So I would rather slightly over budget and come in under that, than under appropriate, if you will. Any questions about those proposals? Okay.
We currently contract the fire inspector role, or do we pay that on a contract basis?
We had part-time inspectors.
Okay.
And both of them have separated, retired or left the organization. In the meantime, Chief Miller's been doing it himself.
Wow.
So the man's exceptionally dedicated, and for that we are all very grateful. But for example,
do so much.
when the Dollar General fire broke out, he was the one doing the inspection and then talking with all 18 insurance adjusters that were out there, filling them in on all that. So it will also free up time for him. Right Point, and I apologize, the table here, I don't know what happened to that. But this just builds off the conversation that we just had with ESG. Like I mentioned before, we would plan on issuing an additional $2 million for the band to cover the cost of the restroom improvements. It's kind of covered up here, and I'm sorry. The current note is about $4.5 million. If we move forward with that plan, we would issue a note in 2025 that would be about $6.5 million. We of course will pay more interest on that. Interest rates have already started to fall. I'm optimistic interest rates will be lower than what we're paying now.
You say we'll pay more interest or more interest rates?
Well,
Lower interest
a lower interest rate, but because the principal would be higher.
Correct, yeah. I
Yes.
want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yep. So this is a short table that breaks out what I was trying to describe earlier, which is that in FY '24, which is this budget year, we would move ARP money and some general fund reserves in order to front load the first part of the project costs. And then next year, we would bake into the budget we present to you this assumption that we'll take out slightly more debt to cover the rest of it. The other point here to emphasize is that we will continue, I think this year, the Right Point subsidy was about $600,000 as budgeted. That will probably need to go up a little bit before the end of the year. Like everybody else, our utility costs have continued to increase. So we will continue the practice of making transfers into Right Point in order to keep the operating side of it running smoothly. And again, I think over the next 12 to 24 months, really what we're doing is making targeted investments in the building that help our overall strategy with Westway, but even if that falls through, help us market the buildings or move into them if we need to in the future. Questions about Right Point? Woodman. So in prior years, we have had a urban paving program or some sort of equivalent road program project. What we plan to do is make a very conscious decision in this next year's budget to begin the process of saving some resources in order to bring the Woodman Corridor stuff to life. What I mean by that is we do have $1.5 million in congressionally directed funds from Congressman Turner's office to start design on the Woodman Corridor work that we've all been doing with respect to the Safe Streets for All stuff. We do have a local match associated with the CDF funds. Off the top of my head, I believe it's between $300,000 and $400,000. So we will incorporate that local match into the budget. But that money will essentially let us get to full design on the Woodman Corridor, which would mean that sometime next year, we'll know how much it will cost to start building it, and we'll want to start to assemble a coalition of partners to help us pay for it. And given that we will be doing Woodman Phase 1, so that's from Eastman down to the 35 Bridge, that project is expected to sell in January and continue for 2 years. We will effectively be on a large 2-year-long road reconstruction project on the south end of Woodman and trying to go get more money to do the north end of Woodman shortly thereafter. So our strategy is to see the existing project on the south end through next year and then start to line up and save money so that we can bring capital to the table if we need to in 26, 27, 28 as this project gets more refined. Make sense? So another way of saying that we do not right now have any other road improvements in the budget because these are very large, very expensive, very big ticket items as far as, and also I would say exceptionally transformative. If we accomplish what we're showing in our design plans, the entire corridor is going to feel a lot different in a way that's very unique around the entire base. So that'll be the overall approach for roads. Next is Rohrer Park. So as folks may recall, a while ago, the concession stand in the building out there burned, and we demolished it and received an insurance payout. That insurance payout was about $200,000. What I will attempt to build into the budget, and this should be easy to accomplish, is that we'll appropriate $100,000 in next year's budget and then another $100,000 for 2026 in order to make some targeted improvements at Rohrer Park. The two pictures, the first is the new playgrounds actually have been installed. Those were acquired in part with CDBG funding.
A community.
And at Rohrer. And we got a solid waste grant as well that helped pay for them. So that has already gone in. One of the ideas that came out of the Rohrer Park Town Hall that we had last month and in conversations with the Parks and Rec Committee are modular sort of bike track systems that are easy to put in, relatively secure. You can anchor them, resistant to things like graffiti and the weather and whatever and what have you, and are also fairly inexpensive. You can get started with some of these systems at $30,000, and then as you build out the features that you want, of course, they get more expensive. But in the budget, what we'll do is appropriate that money and then continue to have conversations with Parks and Rec and with the neighborhood to figure out what amenity fits that budget. And then the money will already be there for us to start acquiring and installing that amenity as a result of those conversations. Last, we need to talk about decorative lighting. So we did some homework. We got a quote from Security Lighting for poles on the bridge. And at the same time, I mentioned, I think at the last meeting, that we're having issues with the lights out in front of the center of flight property. So that's what I'm trying to show here. Beth and Kevin went out and did some inspections of these lights. These are the pole numbers. All the pole numbers in red have significant corrosion to the bases. So you can see, and these are all the double arm poles. On these poles, the actual aluminum itself is fractured. And this creates a real safety risk. Like if we were to get some real bad straight line gusts through here, these poles could come down in the road, on a car, on a person, et cetera. So they are a safety hazard and we need to do something. Conservatively, it's about $15,000 per pole to replace these. If we were to try to do all of this lighting at once, our total bill would probably be around $300,000 to do all the decorative lighting. But I have not included this in the budget for one reason, and that's the temperature check tonight, which is that there's a part of me that says we're on the cusp, we just talked about the Woodman project, we're on the cusp of redesigning this entire corridor and fundamentally changing the character of the intersections and how the road interfaces with paths and pedestrian access and everything else. And we have the opportunity when we do that to pick a design aesthetic that can become basically the design standard for the rest of the city, including any other thoroughfares and other streets that we have. So a part of me says it may be more prudent to wait a year. If we get through next year's design process and we pick this is the kind of pole that we want, and we're going to carry that pole concept throughout the entire city on all future road projects, we could wait until next year to make this investment. If you would rather we do our level best to basically put this in the budget for next year and just replace what we have, we can do that as well. But I didn't know how you all felt about that approach at this potential price tag.
I think we're in a position where we can wait because the things that are on the cusp of happening, as Josh points out, could become very much tangible at this time next year. And we would not only be in a better position, hopefully financially, to make these decisions, but also from the standpoint of the things that are breaking in our favor. We have a good idea of what it might be now, but we don't know. That's my thought.
I don't disagree. Why replace poles when we might be changing them again in a few years? Now, these ones that are the safety risk, are we thinking about taking them down?
Yes, if we were to not replace these poles, then what I would recommend is that we actually remove them and we can take the poles up inside here are somewhat dense. We could actually have security fence move some of these and maybe space some of them out. So like replace every other pedestal so that there will still be plenty of light and we can use the existing poles to help maintain that light through the corridor. And still leave some back here as well. And that would tide us over for at least the next year while we basically make this decision, so.
I support that approach.
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts?
Well, to me, it also gives us time for our investments to help pay for this. We get we could take a year of interest and cover this cost, but we have to have that in the bank for a year in order to cover this cost. That also gives us the time to make a decision on, is this the type of light we want for the whole city? or do we want something else? And I think the long term is what we need to look at, not the short term, get it done, put a light bulb in and make it go. I think we need to go for the long term and go for the investment and hope that our investments are actually better than, and I mean, I don't know if we can or not, but I would even say earmark that interest as that's what's going to pay for this next year, or something like that.
Well, and one way that we'll approach that, and this is a good segue maybe into some of the next steps, is that part of what we are trying to roll out starting this year in ClearGov is the actual capital planning module. And what that lets us do is make assumptions about how much we need to invest in capital over the next 5 years. So what I would anticipate, for example, is that even in this year's budget, for the purposes of the capital plan, I can start to bake in 2026, 27, 28, we're going to need X amount of dollars for street light replacement for decorative lights. So I can put basically a project in the capital plan that shows we will replace these lights in 2026, one way or the other, with a dollar amount that's there, so that we have effectively a reserve, an earmark inside the budget that's allocated toward that replacement.
Should we decide to do it then?
Correct. But on that note, what we will do next is continue to work through our ClearGov budgeting numbers with these assumptions in mind. And our goal will be to preserve fund balance to the greatest extent possible. I do want to set expectations, though, for you all and for the public. Since I've been here, we have produced pretty much every budget has shown a budgeted deficit. I don't think we're going to get away from a budgeted deficit, but what I do hope to get to is to a place where I can show that our operating costs are as covered as they can be by ongoing revenue, and that if we are buying things for our capital program, like new computers, I know Service wants a replacement truck because the brine truck is about to crack in half. Those types of expenses could come out of fund balance, basically out of money we already have in the bank, and we will manage that so that we're not drawing our fund balances too low, but that where we're able to buy capital using our reserves, we may make some targeted investments that way. Once we get all that rolled up, we'll put it in the budget book. All the departments will update their narratives. I hope to get you a draft budget book by November 8th. And the reason, in part, for November 8th is it will be past elections. If we need to do last-minute pivoting, I will do that before we get you the draft budget book. That will give council about a week and I'll make myself available anytime to walk folks through, answer questions before it comes to you at the work session November 14th. At that work session, I would plan on going through all the major funds, basically what we did last year. I'll kind of walk you through general fund, police, fire, service, and right point. Answer any questions that come up. And then we would look for a first vote on November 21st, and then a second vote and potential adoption on December 5th. So we still have time. We have another meeting on the calendar for the 19th of December. So if we do need to extend the process further, we can. But I think, according to this calendar, we're still on a process that is proactive, but and gives us plenty of opportunity for back and forth with questions, but also gets things wrapped up in early December, which is a little bit earlier than we've managed to do it in prior years. Any questions on next steps?
So I think making sure that we're all good with the timeline and that there's enough opportunity for deliberation amongst us and getting information from Josh and the staff in advance of meetings when we might have specific questions or want to know why things look the way they do. I think this is a good first step, and I think we're in good shape to move from here. I just want to make sure everybody else is okay with the timeline. All right.
Speaking of meetings, the 12th of December is a Thursday night, is the Chamber Christmas dinner,
Okay. Are they having Christmas dinner?
every year.
All right, well, the in-crowd invitation said this is our last dinner of the year.
No, that's the
That's the
international.
in-crowd,
This is
that's not the
Christmas
chamber dinner.
The
Chamber
both dinners,
Christmas.
though. They said our last dinner of the year.
Well, that's the international dinner.
Okay. Thank you for
But that's a
clarifying.
Thursday night. And you guys have.
Thursday. Can we go back to that map from earlier? No, just kidding. Thursday nights,
It's the
potential work session.
Right. Just putting it on your calendar.
And I don't know offhand that we have a whole lot scheduled for that work session. But what I'll do is, by the time we get into our November meetings, I'll give you an update and we'll try to block and tackle on that, so. Couple other little quick updates. I know I sort of punted the administration stuff here to the end, and I want to be sensitive to time, so I will do my best to be quick. The first is, I did want to kind of pick everybody's brain, because I know we're getting toward the end of the year, and depending on how the calendar may shift, like if we do cancel a December meeting or a work session or what have you, Katie and I were talking, we're trying to get a sense of whether or not, for the folks that are here this evening, we really, we need to decide, or maybe get a little bit of feedback on whether or not you want to stick with Thursday meetings in order to start setting up next year's calendar. I assume you're all still comfortable with Thursday meetings at 6 o'clock. But if there was going to be a discussion about that, I didn't know if there would be any potential movement toward changing that, because if there is, we would need to know so we can start setting up a calendar for next
You
year.
have to actually announce it at the first meeting when
Yeah.
it's a discussion item.
Organizational
It will just
meeting.
help, and knowing that there's no new people on board right now, I wouldn't think, but it will help me to start to prep this calendar.
I like to have Mondays.
I thought that had to be Thursdays.
No, you can actually
I like-
decide something else.
I prefer
I would argue against that, from my own particular.
Well, that's something to consider.
That's
I
fine.
honestly, I didn't know that there was an opportunity to change it, but.
Yep, at your organizational meeting, you can set basically
Yes.
whatever day and time.
And we're
Right.
statutorily required to meet once a month, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So food for thought, and you don't need to weigh in, we don't need to decide that this evening. It is a work session after all. But just to the extent that that's something to think about, once we nail that down, that'll help us start populating a calendar for next year. Second thing is that we do have the new lighted sign up at the fire station. If you haven't seen it, take a drive by and check it out. And I do want to give Chief Miller a lot of credit. There was a fair amount of drama involved with that, where the original contractor had a bit of a falling out, and we had to do, really he did quite a lot of legwork to get that project back on track and get it installed. There may still be an electrical issue with the GFI out there. That will be fixed. The bigger question is, now that we have it and we can add messages to it, in talking with Katie and a little bit with Jim, I think our sense is that we have sort of taken the approach, the practice, especially on social media, that we keep posts constrained to things that are either other government entities or things that the city itself is directly involved in. That way we kind of keep a nice separation between other First Amendment stuff and stuff that is our direct community engagement. Just wanted to pick your brain about whether that approach would be the same approach you would want to take with a lighted sign or no. Because if we do start opening the sign up to third-party advertisers, then I think that raises questions about, should we open social media posts up to third-party advertisers? And then are we going to start running afoul of free speech stuff if we let some advertisers but not others? And if you'd like, we can give you a recommended policy. But the cleanest way, I think, not to speak for us, but the cleanest way in our view is just to limit it to what we do or what other governments are involved in.
Other governments being,
Montgomery County, like if Montgomery County has a tire buyback program, that impacts everybody that lives here in Riverside. So we would probably cross-promote that, like I believe I did, on our social media, so everybody knows, because it's something that impacts everybody.
I think
And-
that's the only way to go. I don't.
yeah,
think it
I'm just
can
trying
be.
to, I'm trying to remember things that I might have seen on the previous sign before, like if RABA was having signups and they were holding them at 1791, it was not uncommon to see that on the previous
right.
sign years ago.
Yeah.
Now,
Pee Wee football signups.
Pee Wee football
were on there.
signups, I mean, you don't want, but there again, how many steps further can you go from that? And is it, I'm sure our attorney's here, he would say, it's probably better to just stick to the very simple 1 degree of separation, another government agency or political subdivision.
Yes, that takes away the problem area, which is that discretion. So what is approved by the city to be posted and displayed, what is not approved? You either have a sort of a bright line determination that the city's own messaging and then the messaging of partner public agencies, other governmental units that affects all the residents and is worthwhile for those residents to see. It takes away the discretion. So nobody can say, well, you didn't allow my message, but you allowed this other entity's message. It takes a lot of exposure away.
Yeah.
Takes it all away, essentially.
I think we're busy enough dealing with the real estate of these buildings than to have to worry about one more thing and have to take people, applications and all that aspect and open that can of worms. I think you're busy enough I think that's just fine.
My only request is the lettering is big enough and bold enough that it's legible.
And stays up for more than
And
3
the only thing
seconds.
I've heard about at night, it's too bright.
Okay,
I
we'll
don't
look at
know.
that too.
Anything about technology.
Well, the city code has limits on the amount of lumens that can be emanated, I believe.
That's
Nits.
correct.
When I first-
Ms. Holt would.
When I first
school us
put
on
up the
that.
sign at
Never write me a
Stebbins up there, I was the one who, it takes a little time to get used to
Mm-hmm.
and figure out, they'll get it.
And the rotation.
I'm happy
Yeah.
to share that with the police department or fire, whoever is managing the sign.
I'm going to get a letter in the mail. All right, we will take a look at all of that. Only 2 other quick things. First, I did want to make a note for folks watching at home. I do want to give Katie a huge shout out. She's done quite a lot of work over the last couple of days to get ballot-related information up on the website. And it's up with a nice, bright yellow banner. So there is a condensed version of what all the ballot issues are about for Riverside on the website. You can log on and check it out. I believe it's also been cross-posted to social media. We also are working with Mad River and one of our interns from the school to produce some short videos. You should see those maybe early next week, maybe sooner. I really nerded out
He's the
hard on
star.
those. And Officer Toscani also did an excellent job providing information about the police levy, so keep an eye out for that. And finally, I know we had questions about speed trailers a couple meetings ago. We did take a look at the one that we have, and the short answer, it is well past its useful life. So all the tires are shot. It basically needs a whole new power plant, power system. It's not worth restoring. I asked Ms. Moore and Chief Robinson to do a little bit of homework on additional, whether they're standalone fixed poles that can do flashing speed signs or additional trailers. Our gut says that part of the reason the trailer is in such bad shape is that it was hit on multiple occasions by cars.
Oh, jeez.
And
And you think the pole it will.
Well, I don't know. I
We
mean,
got to do something.
But if the pole is cheaper than a trailer,
Yeah,
that's what we're kind of
exactly.
trying to figure out right now. And so we will get some pricing and then revisit that.
I think technology has moved forward quite a bit since we had that. And I believe I've seen in other municipalities, just basically their speed limit sign has it built into it. and
Yeah.
It's solar powered and all that. And I think if we're talking about the Woodman corridor, which I think that's what Mrs. Lomatch was talking about, I see no problem with doing that, putting a pole up with a, unless it's.
Anything.
Unless
Sure.
it's really too expensive,
Right.
so.
Well, I will hopefully bring something in front of you. If the pricing is aggressive, then I'll definitely give you an update. But if not, I'll send you an email or something with where that lands and how we intend to pay for it. But to your all's point as well, I think there's a lot of alignment there, especially in the Woodman corridor, because we're about to we're well on this path to reconfigure that whole roadway. Starting to get ahead of that now with some messaging about what speed limits we're actually targeting is going to be helpful, because when we do reconfigure the roadway, you're likely to see a slight adjustment to the posted speed signs there as well, so.
You probably check Amazon or Temu, I mean.
AliExpress, sure.
Well, and it's not just out here. I mean, the speed between Airway and 35.
Oh, yeah. Well, and on spinning, I know it's a challenge too. On Valley, I know it's a
Well,
challenge.
yeah,
So
but-
there's lots of places that I think we will develop kind of a short list of some target areas where we want to get these put in, so. we're working on that, and I'll have it ready, as soon as I have it ready, I'll bring it forward to you. So that's all I had.
That's it?
That's it.
All right.
2.5 hours later, well, 2. It's not even 8 o'clock.
I'm waiting for you to say, like, and 2 more quick things.
Actually, we started 3 minutes late.
Well, can you go back to the map?
Yeah, which map? Which map would you like to see?
Well, the one we were using. I mean,
No, they don't meet it.
we do need to see the topographic features that we were not able to see earlier, but after we look at that a few more times.
Of course.
Move to adjourn.
Councilmember comments.
Are there any council member comments? Would any council members like to offer comment before we adjourn?
I have nothing, sir.
All right, I have nothing. Mr. Deputy Mayor Maxfield,
You sure?
do you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything.
I
Well,
knew it.
I do.
Miss Fry, we'd love to hear what you have for us this evening.
So my kids are home on fall break, and we took the opportunity for all of us to go downtown and early vote as a family. Early voting is open. They, at the Board of Elections, it was very fast. We were in and out in 10 minutes, and definitely a smooth operation. They are open 8 to 5 from now until the week before the election for early vote. The week before the election, now between then, it'll be weekdays, 8 to 5. And then the weekend before the election, they'll have weekend hours as well. So definitely take the opportunity if election day is going to be difficult for you to get out and vote. That's it for me
What day did you go?
today.
Okay, I was down there today also.
Were you?
And I was really, I would agree that it was very quick, and I also liked that I saw the 2 directors, Russ Joseph and Jeff Resback, were in there working.
Oh, very nice.
They were, helping put paper ballots into the proper containers. They were helping people direct them to the correct way, and there was also a good crowd of first-time voters from Ponitz High School.
Oh,
And it
very
was,
nice.
and Jeff and Russ both, were kind of high-fiving them as they went through for their first time, and it was very nice to see that. So credit to the Board of Elections. I would certainly agree.
Yes.
And and it's free parking.
The garage is open,
Yes.
so it's completely
You
free.
get a parking chit if you park in the garage.
Yeah, I think.
And
that
that's important.
Today it was just open. It said no
Oh, they
ticket.
weren't charging, huh?
Right. So certainly agree, and thank you for mentioning that, Brenda.
Mm-hmm.
On to Mr. Denning.
I just want to thank staff for all the work that went on to make all this happen and make the budget and all that happen, because this is way more information than we normally got years ago. And I think we're going to be well prepared to make this happen. So, thank you.
And we are adjourned at 8 p.m.